Nancy, great presentation earlier today. Lots of questions, and we'll see how many of these we are able to get through. And this will, maybe I'll start with Nancy first on this question. Lots of questions on the Q&A regarding remote workers. Can you tell us a little bit about how remote workers are potentially impacting the population count and the impact on housing?
So, as you know, Cindy just talked a lot about remote workers and telework and how going forward, it's certainly a question. And currently, so in terms of like where somebody gets counted, we know lots of mountain communities, resort communities have felt an increase in people because likely people during the various times of the pandemic were working remotely, perhaps in their second home in a mountain community. But where people get counted as a resident is where they live most of the time. And if you were temporarily working remotely someplace else in Colorado, you're not necessarily going to be counted there as a resident. The migration data we do get is based on tax returns, and it's based on where you're filing year over year, among other things. And so it's more this idea of a permanent resident. So from that sense, remote workers have to be someplace the majority of the time. That being said, the decrease or the lack of migration or the decrease in some of the Denver metro counties would possibly be this idea of people moving out to more suburban areas because maybe you didn't have to drive into your office in downtown Denver 5 days a week. So there's some various things going on with that, but in terms of where somebody is counted, it's where their permanent residence would be.
Anything that you would like to add, Cindy, to that question? No? Okay. You're just like, no.
No, I think Nancy summed it up perfectly. It's perfect.
Yeah, perfect. So let's go into the international migrants a little bit. Question had come in related to, we've seen this downward pressure on visas as well as international migration, but you are thinking maybe that's going to change. What do you think?
Just the data that we have thus far in terms of 2022 being higher than 2021. So as some of those offices were able to get through, so during the pandemic, a lot of those offices had to close. And so that was part of the reason that we saw such a reduction historically. So it wouldn't be hard for us to get above those 2020 and 2021 levels, but as those offices continue moving forward. So I don't know if Nancy or Elizabeth, if you want to add to that.
No, I mean, I part of the question also includes a comment related to, it seems like we've got this great demand for labor, yet maybe federal policy is not understanding that. I know that that's not something that we really talk about necessarily. We have no control over federal policy. And we've always said in the office that the business of America is business. And that if there is this demand for labor, will we see more of an equilibrium or more of a policy to strategically look at international migration to fill some of these? So I think, that's in general our thought process behind it. And again, some initial data that we're seeing for 2022 would indicate that those international migration numbers as well as visas are starting to increase. Is that correct?
Right. And I'll just add on top of that. So the national forecast that we look at as well have, international immigration holding at just about 1 million, they assume, every year in the forecast, because nobody can project it, right? That is a political decision. So most are assuming 1 million per year in the forecast moving forward. So the U.S. forecast would vary based on if they increase that number.
Perfect. Yeah, no, absolutely. So question for you, Nancy. How are new houses that are replacement houses, for example, Marshall Fire, how is that whole housing piece calculated and taken into account?
I can say I'm not looking forward to doing next year's because we'll be deleting essentially 1,000 housing units from Boulder County. When there are often natural disasters, so other fires throughout Colorado, we remove demolitions. We take out of our count any housing units lost for a variety of reasons, be it a fire, be it a tear down to build something new. So our data does include demolitions. And so with the Marshall Fire, that will be evident. And that as Superior and Louisville and unincorporated Boulder issue new building permits for replacement houses, those will come in as brand new ones. So we will take out the demolitions and add back in new housing units. And ultimately that's the same anywhere. So like in the city of Denver, where you would perhaps demolish a single family house to rebuild something else on that spot, we get the counts for the demolitions, we take it out, and then would add in the new permit.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Kind of so similar, a little bit on the housing unit vein. How are second homes accounted for in that housing stock? And in that graph that you were showing, the housing units to households, how are second homes, VRBOs, taken into account?
Well, overall, we get some interesting data from the census, from American Community Survey on vacant homes, but what is their status as vacant? And so there is a category, and there has been historically, I was looking it up back to 1970 at least, of second homes, or homes that are seasonal or occasionally used. And looking back historically in Colorado, about 4% of our total housing stock was used for these recreational, seasonal, occasional homes. And short-term data looking at the American Community Survey from 2011 to 2021 actually see a bit of a decrease. We were up to about 5% of our total housing stock in the state was being used as these seasonal second homes, vacation homes. That's decreased, actually. The 2021 American Community Survey is showing about 4%. So they all are in there. We don't have, for the individual communities, we don't have hard numbers on what that is, but second homes are included. And yes, they do obviously complicate things, but we are very much aware of the idea that there are more houses because of these second homes, because of rentals, than there are households in them.
Perfect. Thank you. And I it's complicated, right? And interesting, it's like housing units don't stay necessarily stable as one thing or another, right? Certainly units can transition in and out of VRBOs or second homes. And so keeping a good count of that is very difficult, and obviously a challenge that we're looking at in terms of just total numbers as well as share of total. Because I think that's what people are very interested in, is even when we're projecting forward. So we get a lot of questions, and especially lately in this year, on what is our household or housing unit forecast. And we're quick to reply that we can give you a pretty good estimate on that household forecast. But that doesn't necessarily mean the entire housing unit demand forecast, because of this idea of kind of like what we would consider a natural vacancy rate needed for that in and out supply and demand, but also in terms of share that is going to be second home or VRBO or anything on that end. Cindy, would you like to share anything else on kind of this concept of housing unit or household forecast?
Sure. And so for those of you who aren't aware, our office does do household projections. They're based on the age distribution of the population. And so what we do is we look at our forecast by age, and we have typical household formation rates, or at least historical household formation rates that held relatively consistent up until about 2010. We started to see some changes in terms of household formation by different age groups. But that's how the basis of these household projections moving forward. So it is not a projection of housing units, but it is a projection of households. But we know that, during recessionary periods and this last decade, we saw more households living together. So each household not necessarily representing one housing unit. You could call it doubling up, households doubling up together or whatnot. We saw that increase last decade, but those household forecasts, we do them by 4 age groups of householder and by 4 different household types, and they are available on our website.
Perfect. Thank you. So, going to tie things up with 2 maybe more fun questions. They're all fun, right? But interesting ones here. So, one question coming in: if these trends, meaning kind of our population forecast, growth slowing, etc., were to continue long run into the future past 2050, is a population collapse more likely issue than overpopulation in the United States?
Thank you for the question. And I can tell you that overpopulation, I don't think I've heard that in a very long time. And so it's definitely, but collapse is not what I would put it as either. We do, the United States, as I mentioned, entering natural decline in 2035. We're still not forecasting that the US population starts to decline after 2035, because we do have an assumed level of immigration of about 1 million going forward. But certainly not much more growth. I can remember a headline, oh my goodness, and Elizabeth, you might have to remember, it was maybe 7 years ago or so, and there was this headline in the paper, and it's like, Colorado will reach 10 million. And I was beside myself, and everybody's like, settle down, Cindy. At that time, our forecasts were for about 8 million, and now they're at 7.5. And they said, so maybe it happens a little bit later. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure it's ever going to happen. 10 million for Colorado. I mean, it could certainly if we see huge declines in other states, but in terms of nationally, we're definitely looking at, once we go out very long term, there's sort of a stable level that I think is going to happen. So I'll leave it there.
Perfect. No, good answer. All right. And then another, and this is kind of a longer, not a trick question, but I need you I'll read it slowly. So I retired from a federal job last year and was at the same time working for my own business. I am still working on my own business now. So how does that get counted? Basically, I was a job and a half working both of those jobs. Now I may be 0.75. So am I working or not?
Well, I'm going to tell you that you are most certainly working, and you are being counted as a worker, and certainly in the labor force. You would be in that number as an employee. The jobs numbers, however, are interesting in that you would be counted, since it's your own business. It's not a wage and salary job. It is one of our proprietor jobs, which Colorado is a very attractive place for proprietors. We have quite a number of them in the state, but then that federal job is still out there. And so if we've got you in the labor force, though, you are absolutely working.
Great. So I will let everybody that submitted questions know, yes, we only got to maybe a third of the ones that were submitted. We will be downloading these all and working on answering them, getting back to you in the next several weeks in terms of some of those Q&A. We'll probably post them on the website on the